Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Poisoner's Almanac. I am your co-host, Adam.
I'm Rebecca.
How are you today, my dear?
I don't know. I think I'm good. I'm tired.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a long week. I did some things. And now I'm exhausted after doing those things.
Your hair looks really cool.
Yeah, I put pink in my hair because I wanted to. But it's temporary. And I was really nervous to do it. But then I was like, well, it's temporary. So it'll go away.
Yeah.
If I don't like it. But I do. I like it.
It's really cute on you.
It's fun. It's Halloween. So I enjoy doing fun things for Halloween.
Certainly. Halloween is your Christmas.
It is.
And you're doing this also as part of your costume for Halloween. You're dressing up as Danica Fendier from the Crescent City book series by Sarah J. Maas.
I don't know if she has this much pink in her hair, but yeah.
Sure. So, yeah. We're on to part 2 of Toxic Ghost Towns.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we're basically talking mostly about Chernobyl.
Right.
There's a lot to discuss, and yeah. But if you like this subject, Midnight in Chernobyl by Adam Higginbotham is a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really great read. It actually, let's see, it's got it was has an Andrew Carnegie Medal.
Yeah, it's an award-winning book on the subject.
And was New York Times one of 10 best books of 2019. So
wow, well
really
played,
good.
Adam.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah,
it's a really well written. Really gives you a lot of details, and I like details.
Mm-hmm. You basically schooled me on how a nuclear reactor is constructed.
Well, the RBMK reactors of that period, at least.
Yes, those at least.
Thankfully, they're actually built quite different now and quite safer.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that Chernobyl was built with basically what they had, and so honestly, it wasn't exactly up to safety standards anyway. But yeah, what's what happens when you try to save money on a nuclear reactor, I guess.
Yeah, that's not the place to cut corners.
No.
So let's jump into some housekeeping for the old podcast here. Make sure you follow us on whatever platform you are listening to us on. Make sure you follow us on socials. There are links in the show notes to do that. Specifically, the podcast Instagram that Becca runs herself, and she posts even more deep and granular content on there. She works really hard on these posts, guys. It's you get what you get on the podcast, but because of Becca's just sheer talent as a researcher and an educator, she's offering an even they're unique. It's a unique level of content on the Instagram. So I
think I just like details. That's probably all it is.
Really, it's just a hyperfixation from my ADHD brain.
Yeah, that's basically it. I mean, I don't know about talent, but they call that a talent, I suppose.
I think it's talent. So also, how many followers are we up to? Are we creeping up toward 1,000 followers on the old podcast Instagram? What was it, like 750?
Something? I don't know.
Yeah, it's getting up there, you guys. We see you guys following.
I want to give false information, so I will look.
Okay. While she looks that up, just know you guys can always suggest, questions or comments or content suggestions for the podcast through a DM or a comment on the podcast Instagram.
Yes, 786.
786. Come on, folks. Let's get to that 1,000. That milli-mil. No.
What?
Meal is French for 1,000, I think. I'm thinking of RPM on TikTok.
What are you talking about?
Revenue per mil.
Okay.
Anyways, thank you guys in advance and also in the past for leaving 5-star reviews on whatever platform you're listening on. There are a truckload of 5-star reviews on the Spotify, at least. And that's really, really helpful. It functions like a tip jar for the podcast because it pushes it further into whatever algorithm brought you the podcast, and it will be pushed out to more people. That signals the algorithm, hey, this podcast is cool. You should push it more to more listeners.
And you need it.
The Patreon is up and running, as we've said for the last several episodes. The link is in the show notes to check that out. You can join the Patreon as a free member You can also join as a financial supporter, and we thank you guys so much for joining up on that. And
also, I plan on adding some extra content soon. Mainly, like maybe it's like probably like only be like 30 minutes, unless I get really into it, and probably turn into an hour like this did. You know how I am.
I do.
But I've already got some ideas. I like to plan my ideas out so that I'm not just like reaching in a hat for things.
Of course.
You know, so but that's my plan soon. Probably either right at or after Halloween, because there is some stuff I really want to dive into that I just haven't gotten to yet.
Oh boy. Yes.
And it'll probably be like kind of random, because one of the first things I want to talk about is was it year 536? You ever heard of that?
No.
Labeled as like the worst year in history.
The worst year in history.
Yeah.
I thought that was 2020.
No. Oh no. No. I mean, it wasn't great, but you know, it was not. I wouldn't call it the worst. I think it was 536 AD.
536 AD. So we're talking about that's trying to think about what was going on. That is ancient. Wow. So the one of the perks of being a paid patron, guys. Oh, real quick, just to finish the thought. You're going to start adding like 30-minute bonus episodes for paying patrons.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about, right?
That's the idea.
So, yeah, Becca's going to pull. We just heard a dog yelp outside for no reason. It's our first step towards offering bonus content for paying patrons. You know, we kind of want to, you guys, if you're familiar with podcasts at all that use Patreon, you know, you leverage Patreon to, you know, for financial support of the podcast, and also to add, you know, tiers and higher levels of content that is available. So, Becca's going to pull one aspect or concept from an episode and expound on that as like a 30-minute bonus episode that'll be available to the paid patrons. Speaking of the paying patrons, one of the perks of being one of those people is you get shouted out by name on the podcast. And they are as follows: 87 Pens Girl 71, Mara Santiago, Kate the Fairy, Grace Lahan, who said she would show us around Ireland if we ever visit. Thank you very much, Grace.
On my list.
We'd love to do that. Genevieve, Nahev Shatrit, Jay Went, Incan Hafner, Carrie Yorsek, Tay of Sunshine, Monique, Shane R., Sue Steves, James Mills, Megan Geiler, Liz B., Woolly Woof NZ, I respect it, Mama G.
So like New Zealand?
They are from New Zealand.
Matter of fact. I want to go there too.
We want to go there too. Really, we're just doing this podcast to get a collection of tour guides for world travel.
But my thing is, I'm probably not going to want to return if I go to one of these places.
And that's the risk you take.
I'm just going to stay there.
So, and lastly, Nicole Rivers, thank you all so much for financially supporting the podcast. It allows us to make better and more content that you all love. Also, we have listener supporters. Listener support is available through Spotify. It is only available to US-based listeners, unfortunately. But should you feel so compelled, listener supporters are as follows: Taylor McCaleb, Carl Ziegler Jr., Drew Revis, and Delshawn Harris. Thank you all so much. And as I said, send questions or content suggestions to the podcast Instagram via a DM or a comment. Anything else we need to mention about the old podcast? Merch? Question mark?
I'm waiting on your behind for that.
Okay.
I did my part. I did my waiting.
12 years of it. In Ashgabat. Why don't you go and play with your chemistry set?
I will.
Anyways, so Toxic Ghost Towns Part 2.
Well, we're going to talk about Chernobyl's aftermath, but we're gonna kind of go into what happened right after, both inside and outside the plant, and I'm going to mention some names, not all of them, because there's a lot of players in this, but maybe just the people that I'm focusing on, you know, and I'm going to do my best to get those names right. So I'm doing my best. I've never been to Russia. I am sorry.
If our Russian or Eastern European listeners could assist.
Yes. I will say this is obviously at the time of when it was USSR. So Soviet Union, all that. So a bit different, but Yeah. So, but last time we did discuss some ghost towns elsewhere, but we ended up at Chernobyl, that nuclear power plant, and then Soviet Union. I think it now is a part of Ukraine. Near Kiev. Kiev. Is it Kiev?
I think they pronounce it Kiev.
Kiev.
We've always said it Kiev.
That sounds like you said a Kia, like a car.
Right. But I'm putting a V on the end. Kiev.
Kiev.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, it could be like the accent difference too.
Yeah.
But we set up how the nuclear reactors were set up. Why did I put set up twice in that sentence? That's atrocious. We went over how the nuclear reactors were set up, as well as how
set up.
The accident that made reactor number 4 go boom.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing a test of a safety test, ironically, and things did not go well.
Turns out it's not safe.
Yeah. You also know a little bit about Pripyat, the populated cities surrounding the site, that most of the families living there would have basically been asleep at this time. It all went down because the test was supposed to be run Friday. It got postponed to later that evening because they wanted the power grid to keep running. They didn't want any kind of, shut down, accidental or
I'm just fascinated. Purposeful. It was like just right in the middle of a populated area.
Well, the area was set up around Chernobyl as a place for families of those who worked there and stuff.
Oh, I see.
To live, but it was quite populated, and it was a really nice town. Like it was, it had a big old Ferris wheel, like an amusement park. It had,
that's
schools,
what I always see the
churches,
Ferris wheel.
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Whenever I see pictures
Pools,
of Chernobyl, quote unquote.
Parks, hospitals. I mean, it was a really nice town.
Yeah.
Alas.
So
we ended at the control room for reactor 4 after the accident. And that's where we're going to pick it up today. So I don't know if you remember Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer for operations. I was struggling with his name last time, and we settled on Dyatlov. Along with control operators Akimov and Toptunov, who honestly became my favorites reading this book. I'm not even sure why, but I was like, I like these guys. These guys are great. Anyway, but they were trying to understand what had just happened, and all these alarms and lights were going off. Control rods were shown as stuck or jammed, and none of them knew or realized that the entire reactor had just exploded. So they knew something was wrong. They didn't know the extent of what that was at that point. Now, Dyatlov ordered 2 trainees that were there to witness the test. Their names were Viktor Proskuratov and Alexander Kudryavtsev, to go and manually force the rods into the reactor. This was not exactly possible at this point, of course, but here we are. Now, Dyatlov also gave orders to get the coolant pump valves open to let in water to the reactor, and this was a constant theme. They're like, we gotta get water in there, But
are they sending those 2 guys to their death?
We'll see. So they were trying to get the valves open to let water into the reactor. Of course, this was also a useless activity. But upstairs, Alexander Yevchenko, he was the senior mechanical engineer. He was upstairs. He knew something horrible had just happened, but he could not get a call through to the control room. So he ran downstairs and saw several men from the coolant pump stations alive, but very injured, scalded, and in shock. So literally just really injured and burned. And he directed them to the infirmary and continued on. So he ended up running into Yuri Tregub on his mission to manually turn on the high-pressure coolant system to let the water in,
Yeah.
Yevchenko decided to help him with this job because it was a 2-man job, really, and they would be the first to really understand what had happened to the reactor as they came across the destruction as well. So there was basically just debris, and there was this pillar of blue-white light pointing up into the night sky. The entire wall was gone. It was open to the world. Okay. It had exploded, which so many people were like, that's impossible. And guess what? It wasn't. So on their way back to the control room, they ran into the 2 trainees that had been sent to, put the cooling rods back in. And a supervisor of some sort had joined them as well. So there's 3 of them now. going to put the control rods manually back in, even though, honestly, the control rods didn't even exist anymore at this point. So Tregub and Yevchenko tried arguing with them that there was no point. Like I said, there was no rods or reactor really there anymore. But they insisted that they needed to see from a different angle. Like at this point, orders are orders, and in the Soviet Union, orders are orders.
Mm-hmm.
So Tregub carried on his way to the control room, and Yevchenko went with this new group on their pointless mission. So, so when they got to the door leading to the reactor, Yevchenko had to hold it open so that the other three, the trainees and the supervisor, wouldn't get trapped inside because the mechanism for the door had broken. So the other 3 men went inside, which would prove to be a horrible idea because there they could see the remains of Reactor 4. The barrier had been torn off and tilted away. Pipes and tubes were in pieces everywhere. So even if you turned on the water, it's not going. No. Wow. And there were no control rods anywhere. Remember, I mentioned this thing had like 211 control rods. They had lifted them all up and then brought them all back down at the same time.
They're destroyed.
They're gone. Yeah, they're gone. They also saw the glowing hot core in the crater left behind, this basically angry active zone of radiation, right? Within seconds, these 3 men had been exposed to levels of radiation that would prove fatal.
Yeah.
Maybe not right away, but I mean, in seconds.
That's wild.
Now they reported back to Control Room 4, but Dyatlov refused to believe the reactor itself had exploded like that. So his behind went to go investigate as well. He didn't go straight where they went, though. He would pass by like terribly burned, injured workers. I mean, like skin literally hanging off, kind of burns, terrible burns. And he walked outside around units 3 and 4, basically seeing a whole like 17 plus stories of wall missing from Unit 4. Like
wow.
it went boom.
Yeah. And
a lot of it was like built up steam and that like sort of pressurized.
Yeah. I was going to ask a minute ago. It wasn't a combustion explosion. It was like a.
Now it became combustion because graphite is.
It was flammable.
It broke out into small fires after the explosion.
Okay, but really it was the buildup of pressure.
Yeah, radioactive steam and just.
Wow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So it was a lot. Now he also, like I said, he saw fires. He saw debris everywhere. But upon his return, he actually scolded Toptanov for returning to his post when he'd been ordered away. Akimov had been there, and apparently Toptanov was supposed to, abandon post or whatever. But Toptanov was like, "No, I can't do that. Y'all obviously need help." So he and another actually stayed on, trying to get water into the non-existent reactor as ordered. So by now, I know they can't. And some of the people try to tell them that, like, there's no point in doing, what are you doing? But there are people who refused to believe and kept giving orders for water to be pushed in.
They couldn't get their head around the fact that it had exploded.
Right.
So, yeah. That was never supposed to happen.
Well, they were told it was unexplodable.
Unexplodable.
That's not a thing.
Okay.
Anyway, by now, the nearby fire station had been alerted, and they were on their way to the site, not knowing the full scale of the matter. They were only like 2 minutes away from the area, however, so they had actually seen this mushroom-shaped cloud over the reactor site. Just saying, if you see that, probably not a great thing, ever. So
I'm thinking of like the opening, the scene from the Fallout series on Amazon.
Yeah, but that was from like a nuclear war type scenario, right? Like they were dropping.
Right. But there's still
yeah, that whole scenario doesn't make any sense to me. Like why you would drop a nuke somewhere. I mean, I know we did it because
100%.
Whatever. And I hope it never happens again.
America first.
But when the Cold War happened and there was all these threats of nuclear bombs, like you're gonna make the world worse for you too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nuclear holocaust is not really a great idea for anybody.
Anyway. So all of the trucks, along with 2 extra tankers for water supply, were on the way. Lieutenant Pravin of this particular fire brigade had called in for backup, citing basically the highest level emergency alert, which would call for like every available fire brigade in the Kyiv region.
Dude.
Because, you know, they're like, what the heck is going on? They couldn't get calls into the site and everything. So, meanwhile, Viktor Brukhanov, the plant director who we mentioned last time, basically the guy who put this place together on orders from the government, built up the city and everything, he was in absolute denial about there having been a reactor explosion as well. He arrived about just before 2 a.m. and made his way to a protected bunker, you know, privileges, where other officials would be as well, as working phone lines. So like they had phone lines that could go straight to, you know, certain places. Now, he knew an accident had happened, but he refused to believe the reactor was just gone or that radiation was now spilling out into the atmosphere. And it was. He just ordered more water to be flushed through it, like everybody else. Even though everything was in shambles and all this did was flood the area with radioactive water, like underneath the reactor and around it and everything. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, which was going to be a problem later. Now, radiation exposure, especially gamma rays or X-rays, we talked a little bit about the different kinds, like the alpha particles, beta particles, gamma rays last time. But especially gamma rays or X-rays is measured in units of, is it Röntgens? Equivalent man, REM. I was going to say REM from now on because apparently I can't say Röntgen. So 500 REM is considered fatal.
It's the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah. Great band. Now, this means that if exposed to a level of 500 REMs per hour for 60 minutes, you are about to have a really bad day. Because of the explosion of Reactor 4, the roof of Unit 3 was reading gamma and neutron radiation at 3,000 REMs per hour. Okay. So much higher.
Did it compromise the adjacent reactor?
Not yet.
Oh.
But yeah, there was danger of that though. So in other areas, it was as high as 8,000 REMs per hour. Now, at these levels of radiation, you could be receiving fatal doses within a few minutes, like 3 minutes.
That's awful.
When firemen arrived, none of them had any idea exactly what they were dealing with. None of them had dosimeters, and calls to the plant were not going through. As you can imagine, they were literally just wearing fireman gear. They just not like they had any special gear or anything like that. So they just did their best to start putting out multiple fires on the roofs of Unit 3 and what was left of Unit 4.
Were they aware that it was just...
No.
They had no idea there was radiation just blowing everywhere?
No.
How could they... What?
Yeah. But even the plant director didn't believe that that radiation was spewing out because he didn't believe that there was...
Because they didn't believe it exploded.
You're right.
That's fascinating.
They just thought, oh, there's fires. We need to put out the fires.
But the sound.
What sound?
The sound of the explosion. I mean, I don't know. I would immediately put on a hazmat suit.
They might not even had any.
What year is this again? The 80s?
Yeah, but they weren't exactly prepared for an exploding reactor because they didn't believe the reactor could explode.
Okay, yeah. Please continue. I'm just fascinated.
So there were fires on the roofs of Unit 3, and they were worried, obviously, that it would affect that reactor as well, so they had to put those out. Now, the black smoke from the fires was visible, but the radiation surrounding them was not, obviously. There was this sort of fog with a strange smell, though. That's how intense the radiation was. You could actually sense it, smell and taste-wise, which is not usually not usual. But the firemen believed that worse problems were ahead because if the fires were to spread to more of Unit 3 and to the turbines of what used to be Unit 4, there's a collection of fuel and hydrogen in that area. And as you know, hydrogen itself is, an ingredient for boom.
Yes, as we know from the Hindenburg.
Yeah. So it itself is highly flammable.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah. And the fuel would be like a collection of uranium, things like that. Now, this could lead to another explosion of Unit 4 or the destruction of another reactor, which would be in Unit 3. Basically, the entire station was in danger of going big boom. Okay. Now, these were not typical fires, though. They were formed of graphite, pellets of uranium fuel, and pieces of what was holding the uranium fuel within it. All of this burning stuff was giving off intense gamma radiation, literally thousands of REMs per hour. And I remember, like, an hour of 500 REM is lethal, and less than that is still pretty awful for your body.
How do you put out a fire like that?
Well, not easily.
Yeah.
So it's actually not easy to put out these kind of fires safely with water, because when uranium dioxide is heated this high, that's the fuel that was being used. We're talking about like 4,000 Celsius before the reactor exploded. It ignites just hitting the air, as we see now.
Mm-hmm.
And the water that was being used to put out the flames was honestly making things worse in a way, because it's causing this reaction that releases hydrogen, oxygen, and also now radioactive steam.
Oh my God. That's not good.
Yeah. So like they're trying to put out these fires, and they're just seeing sparks of more fire, and it's like, what is happening? Why isn't this working? Now, these firemen would actually soon fall very ill trying to put out the fires. Like, it came on very quickly. They did finally succeed with putting most of the blazes out on the roof, but they came down nearly falling over, not making much sense, and vomiting profusely. They could, yeah.
That's terrible.
2 others took their place to check for any remaining fires, but when one of them went up there, one of them went temporarily but completely blind for like 30 seconds. Yeah. They said, screw it, and they went back down. On another end of the site, 2 more men observed for any more fires needing to be put out. So they were just, they were in different areas, but they're, just trying to make sure there wasn't any other immediate threat to the other reactors.
Mm-hmm.
By mid to late morning, Control Room 4 was also now dealing with high radiation levels, and Dyatlov himself was a mess. He was weak. He was vomiting here and there. And he finally went to brief Brukhanov, who was downstairs in that bunker. Unit 3 foreman shut down the reactor there against orders, apparently, and smartly closed the control room's ventilation to keep contaminated air from coming in. So they were, very smart in doing that, even if it was against orders.
So now somebody's concerned about radiation.
There was a handful of people that were like, this ain't cool, but there were so many other people who were actually in charge that were like, no, we don't want to be alarmist. We don't want to cause panic. Everything's fine. We're fine. Everything's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, units 1 and 2 remained online. Akimov and Toptanov had actually left the control room 4, to try to manually turn the valves to let water into the reactor, because they were still under the impression that that's what they were supposed to do and this would help, even though it's not going to help. But like I said, this is both useless. It's dangerous too, as they had to walk through contaminated water as it rained down over their heads, thanks to busted pipes. So they're like ankle deep already in this contaminated water. So they managed to turn one of the valves, but now they're also dealing with symptoms of acute radiation sickness. They were having trouble standing up. They were vomiting, that kind of thing. So, it came on very quickly. They're exposed to a lot of radiation.
Mm-hmm.
More specialists and city and plant officials came into the bunker by about 5:30 a.m. Now, remember, this is Saturday. Okay. I'm going to try to keep the timeline consistent so that nobody gets confused.
Saturday's day
This is Saturday, because it starts like in the early morning hours of Saturdays when the accident happened.
Okay.
So after midnight. So 5:30 a.m., these city and plant officials are coming to try to figure out what happened and what to do next. And at this point, Viktor Brukhanov, the plant director, had gone to see Reactor 4 for himself, well, what was left of it. But even after seeing the destruction, he refused to believe it was done for completely. Others decided to go out with equipment to measure radiation levels, because, they're concerned around the site. When they returned with their findings, that the levels were literally reading off the meter's ability to read them anymore. Brukhanov, hearing this, though, he was like, well, we don't want to announce such a thing, and he's gonna like get a second opinion, I guess.
Okay.
And so he wanted to know the findings of the chief of radiation safety who had just arrived. And this dude said that while levels were elevated, it wasn't high enough to be a big deal, and that the stuff in the air was just a bunch of noble gases, so they didn't have to be concerned. This was like so far from the truth.
Oh God.
In so many ways. I don't know if he was just incompetent or if he was just lying. I don't know. Whatever. When the first guy I mentioned went out to test again, the levels had increased into the thousands, and he could literally see a glowing beam of light extending toward the city from the plant. And so he's just like, why? What the heck? He also saw operators and firemen being loaded into ambulances at this point. There was a roadblock manned with police. His clothes were incredibly contaminated by this point as well. And he apparently rushed back to report all these findings to Birkenov, but was pushed aside and told to leave. And he tried to call out from the bunker to civil defense authorities, but the operator told him that he was not allowed to make these calls. So there were people that were like, okay, we need to...
Operator?
Yeah, on the bunker calls.
Oh, they're practically not... They can't connect that call? Is that what they're saying?
No, they're saying, like, you're not allowed to make these kind of calls. Only certain officials are allowed to call in to this.
Right.
And you're not one of them anymore, so...
Right.
But yeah, so there were people who were concerned and trying to report the situation, but anyway.
I'm dumbfounded how long it took for anyone to consider radiation levels.
Oh, it gets worse.
Okay. I still feel comrade. It gets worse.
So elsewhere, other government officials are being made aware of a situation, including the chief engineer at the Ministry of Energy's Department of Nuclear Power. That's a mouthful. He was also the head of OPUS, which is the emergency response team that was created to help in situations such as this, but like they had never been like used. I don't know.
Never used in Russia, huh? Imagine that.
The Ministry of Defense, the Nuclear Emergency Response Team, the Communist Party's Nuclear Industry Chief, the Ministry of Health, and the State Committee for Hydrometeorology, basically weather people, amongst others. And this may seem like it would have been a lot of help with all these specialists, but it's hard to help when there's a problem that is continuously denied, you know? And I don't even know what some of these people do. Like, it sounds like there's a bunch of redundant jobs here.
The redundancy, Department of Redundancy.
Yeah, I don't know. Whatever. But Birkenov would tell others that there had been an accident, but tell them that the situation was under control. He would eventually acknowledge that the reactor had gone once the chief engineer for Ministry of Energy's Department of Nuclear Power, God, that's hard to say in like one breath, actually landed at the site, which was about 11 a.m. with members of the KGB and medical specialists. But then he would go back on this with others. So he'd be like, it's gone. And then like gain some lucidity and be like, no, we're good. So he was having some problems.
Wow.
So it would not be until late afternoon when the leader of the USSR, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, Mikhail Gorbachev.
Yeah, Gorbachev.
Mm-hmm. Is it Mikhail?
Mikhail. Yeah. It's their version of Michael, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's pretty cool though. Mikhail. Mm-hmm. Was informed of the incident at all, so like he wasn't even told about it until like later in the day. Of course, he wouldn't even make a statement for like 2 weeks after. Until 2 weeks after, they tried to keep it under wraps, as they tend to do with a lot of things. Apparently,
it was the 80s.
Oh my gosh! Now, Chief Engineer Nikolai Fomin, however, had already given up on Reactor 4.
Did you say Fomin?
Yeah.
Well, that's the most boring
Fomin.
Russian last name we've had so far.
Anyway, but he'd already given up on the Reactor 4. You know, he was like, this is it. And the attempts to pump in water, he was like, I don't know why we're doing this. He admitted that the reactor had blown to bits, basically. And there was another possible danger of uncontrollable criticality of what was left of the fuel exposed to the open air at this point. So he had already moved on from like, this is gone. We've got other problems to think about. Now, wanting a full report of the situation, there was an aerial radiation survey ordered when the pilot and crew flew into this cloud of radioactive smoke hovering over farmland. So that wasn't cool. The readings there for radiation were above what their equipment could measure, and they quickly flew back away, realizing the danger that they themselves were in. So
that's over farmland, you say?
It's over farmland, but it's also like, and people are working down there. and yeah,
Well,
and
they
like,
haven't said anything.
but even like being in that aircraft, like that, yeah,
You could get
they
cancer just from doing the survey.
they've exposed themselves to all kinds of stuff. So now around 5 p.m. Saturday, a senior member of the Civil Defense Unit relayed to those in the bunker, now including Party Chief Vladimir Malamuz. Now, there's a lot of Vladimirs in this,
for sure,
and Victors,
mm-hmm.
so I'm going to try to keep it as least confusing as I can.
Mm-hmm.
That the radiation readings nearby were at 2,080 REMs per hour. Now, it was at this point that it was decided to evacuate the city of Pripyat, though some high officials believed those wanting to do so were being alarmist still, including the first secretary of the Communist Party of Ukraine, Vladimir Sherbetsky. It would not be until 10 a.m. the next day, so Sunday, 32 hours after the accident, that an actual order to evacuate Pripyat would be given. So at this time, some residents had already started experiencing strange symptoms. Plant workers had secretly called their families to tell them to stay inside and keep the windows closed. And this was like, these calls were being like, they would actually give this information in code because they were worried the calls were being recorded and they can get in trouble for actually mentioning it to people. Some of them. The evacuation order told residents to pack for about 3 days away from the city and to only bring essential documents, clothing, and some food. So some also brought more valuable things as well. But there's about 1,225 buses, 250 trucks, and other vehicles were called in to help the over 51,000 men, women, and children.
That is
in
a
Pripyat.
truckload of people to evacuate. I keep thinking of, I do home health. I'm a physical therapist. I've spent a lot of time in an area that it technically is rural, but it is also the site of a nuclear power plant. And on approach into the area, I mean, you're miles away from the site itself. You start seeing the siren towers that will be engaged if anything goes down, that they can't control at the site of the reactor. They haven't. I mean,
well, there's all these different safety regulations and stuff now that you have to.
For sure.
They did not have.
Well, of course they
sirens.
don't. But this is way earlier in the evolution of nuclear engineering.
Yeah, and they were also dealing with what they had because in the USSR at that time, they built it rather cheaply because that's what they had.
But also, in the American context, we have I've said it before, we have a litigious society. If you do something that harms people, and you are responsible for it, you can be taken to court and there will be serious consequences for the most part.
Yeah, if it's not hidden like things have been. Like because we're not exactly innocent when it comes to hiding things in our history either.
Well,
I don't think any society really is, but
no. When there's lots of money to be made.
Of course, when it's made public, I can see what you mean by the litigious part. But.
Oh, of course. Like when we did the Radium Girl series, I mean, it was just
it took a while.
It took so much time, and those women suffered horribly until there was eventually women
weren't really listened to back then either.
No,
some women aren't listened to now. Just saying.
It was. I remember, like, in that whole series, the first case that actually caught anybody's attention was an extremely wealthy man who died young. So anyways, all
thanks
that to say.
For that. So the evacuation was sort of ordered, and the people were obviously very confused. Nobody was giving them any information. They just knew that maybe there was an incident. At one point, they had tried to pass out some potassium iodide tablets, and people are like, well, okay, this is weird. It's getting weird.
And they didn't explain why they're doing it.
They weren't allowed to talk to their family members that were working there. There was a lot going on.
Oh, man.
Okay. No one had even told those families of the people who had gone to the hospital, like, what was going on. So now, before the evacuation of the city took place, the hospital there had become overwhelmed and was organizing their own evacuation of their radiation patients to Moscow. One was already dead, and at least 25 were in need of emergency airlift.
Yeah.
Now, more and more were arriving, and they didn't have the means to treat such injuries, surprisingly. And they would be transferred to Hospital Number 6 in Moscow under the care of Dr. Angelina Guskova, who had a long, prestigious history with studying radiation sickness. And she'd even been like one of the first to discover chronic radiation sickness. Basically, chronic low exposures could cause some issues.
Oh, no. She's about to...
Yeah. Well, she also wrote a book back in 1970 describing the possible consequences of a nuclear power accident, but was not allowed to publish it.
Are you familiar with the term irony?
Yeah. Anyway. I
like her immediately.
Well, like, they were set on, like, no, nuclear power is the future. We can't be talking about the dangers of it. What's wrong with you? It was also decided that they would drop clay, lead, and dolomite inside the reactor from above to try and bury and put out the core that was still burning and emitting so much radiation. Because if they had allowed it to, they were estimating that it would continue to burn for about 2 months.
Oh my God.
Because, like, on its own, like, if they didn't do something.
I just realized you could pass for a Russian spy with your pink hair.
You watch too many movies. Now, these materials...
Oh my God, are you a Russian spy? Be honest.
No.
Okay.
I can't even pronounce their names. I don't think they're going to hire me.
That's exactly what a Russian spy would say.
Oh my God. These materials would have to be sent in as there was none there. Like, they didn't have a whole bunch of lead and stuff to just drop. So while waiting on those, they used powdered boron and basically, like, had workers from the plant and some pulled from the surrounding farms, had them, like, fill bags with sand as well to be dropped. So, like, they were putting bags of sand and, like, powdered boron, like, together. And
while those tumors grow, help us fill these bags.
Yeah. So, and several helicopters...
A sheep was just born with 3 eyes, but everything's fine.
Yeah, I mean... Several helicopters would make several trips to accomplish this, dropping thousands of tons of these materials to try and stop any further burning and future reaction. Those performing this task were just shoving the bags out of the helicopters in nothing more than flight suits, mind you. So they too were being pelted with gamma rays and intense heat rising from the site. This would seem to help at first, but it actually would kind of backfire, as dropping all of this would cause the foundations under the once reactor to weaken. Okay, because they're dropping a lot of heavy stuff here. Those workers who had remained behind, there's about 4,000 that were made to stay there to, like, help with the running of the city and the rest of the reactors, what's going on at the nuclear power plant.
Yeah.
But those who remained behind started to feel ill and weak as time went on, having sore or raw throats, headaches, and burning or itching skin. Yeah.
It's a hoax.
Oh, Lord. The radioactive cloud I had mentioned before, that the aerial survey team had flown into, was spreading very quickly, and some were worried further evacuation of surrounding regions would be needed. And so they had already planned on there being like a 30-kilometer, about 19 miles radius sort of exclusion zone to sort of, or evacuation zone to sort of just make everybody get out of that area. But
all I hear is Prince Aldrin from Destiny 2 saying, "Good luck getting past the exclusion zone."
Oh my gosh. But yeah, they now they were worried like they'd have to do further evacuations in regions beyond that. So even worse though, it was being carried on wind currents at about 50 to 100 kilometers per hour. Now, this cloud was made up of xenon-133, microscopic pieces of irradiated graphite, iodine-131, and cesium-137 particles at this point. So all these radioactive particles.
Yeah. Nothing you just listed is anything you want to be near.
No. Honestly, if it's got a number after it, you don't want it.
That's a great point. It's got a number after it. I'll tell you what.
Now it reached Scandinavia, where my ancestors are from. I'm just kidding.
Yes.
I'm guessing, honestly. Well, not really.
We will be visiting you soon.
I have what is it? The ancestry.com. I don't even know if is that stuff even real?
I don't know.
I don't know either, but here we are. So
you're definitely Nordic.
It reached Scandinavia within 24 hours of its release. Not cool. By that Sunday, this is the same day everybody was being evacuated from Pripyat. But yeah, by that day it was logged in Denmark, then in Finland, where it was reported. In Denmark, I guess it was Sunday, they weren't working, so it got logged, but it wasn't reported until it reached Finland. So no action was taken at that time, though, when it was reported. But then it reached Sweden, where it mixed with rain and fell into the city of Gavle. I don't know if I said that right.
Our Swedish listeners, if you could help us out.
It's a couple 100 kilometers from like Stockholm.
Okay.
So Monday morning, it was noticed by Swedish workers at the Forsmark nuclear power station as they passed through monitoring points. Wow.
Oh.
And they started setting off alarms, and they were worried like that they had a leak themselves somehow.
Right.
Right.
It's literally
so
carried in the atmosphere.
Yeah. But they couldn't find the source in their own station. So they're just like, where's this coming from? So the nearby population was immediately notified to stay clear of the area, and roadblocks were set up while they investigated. As you can see, they're actually taking action. That's what you're supposed to do.
Because they're aware that nuclear radiation is bad, and you need to tell someone.
Now, the plant was then evacuated.
I feel like the Nordic countries, Denmark included, they just look at the rest of the world so many times and like, what are you doing?
I don't know. I'm sure they've had their own problems.
I'm sure, because they're people too, but at the same time, they just seem to know how to chill.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was in Iceland. There's like no mosquitoes there. And that may seem like a weird thing for me to say. I live in Georgia. We live in Georgia. There's mosquitoes everywhere here.
Yes.
So it'd be cool to actually visit a place that didn't have them.
And there's other things that suck your blood, like grocery stores.
It's true. Anyway, so yeah, the nearby population was immediately notified to stay clear. Officials in Stockholm actually discovered, the plant was evacuated, but then officials in Stockholm discovered that similar reports of radiation, now full of cesium-134, cesium-137, iodine isotopes, cobalt-60, and neptunium-239.
Not Neptunian.
Were coming from an area 200 kilometers away from Forsmark. They also
How bad is it? Well, there's elements hanging out in the air that are named after planets. What would you like to know now?
Technically, like what, Roman gods? Because the planets were named from.
Fair.
So Neptune. So what was that? What would Neptune be?
Plutonium. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but Neptunium is after Neptune, and that's who's the freaking god of the ocean? Crap. Poseidon.
It's a sea of liquor, and he's Poseidon.
Oh, God. Yeah. So anyway. So they also showed signs of graphite, which clearly ruled out their own reactors because they weren't using that. So using meteorological data.
See, Becca, that's an English word.
I know, but it's a lot for my little mouth to. Yeah. They were able to tell that this radioactive cloud had moved in from the southeast. I swear, I sound so much more posh in my head. I do, but when it comes out of my mouth, it just doesn't work.
Okay.
Now, it was also being found in Lithuania at this point. So it's spreading like everywhere. Yeah. The USSR's policy when it came to reporting was not exactly one that built trust in communication, though. There was originally no news about the accident at all. And when an increase in radiation was noted in Kyiv, KGB agents arrived to stop recordings so that they could, prevent panic.
And now the guy running the country is former KGB.
During a meeting of government officials, including Gorbachev, I'm saying his name wrong, Gorbachev.
Yeah, it's always pronounced Gorbachev.
Gorbachev.
Which always makes me think of pork chops, and I'm not sure why.
Interesting.
Anyway, Gorbachev.
It was decided to take the secretive approach for the time being. And actually, Gorbachev wanted to, I think he was trying to go for a more open type thing, but people who were used to the old ways were like, no, we don't want to talk about any of this. So
yeah,
I don't know that much about Gorbachev, but in this incident, he was like, going for like we should probably try to be more open because we were already having problems with foreign, nations.
Right.
Anyway, but it was decided to take the secretive approach. Later that same day, it had been discovered in Sweden. The country then went to the governments of Germany, Poland, and the USSR with a question: had there been an accident? They're just like, "Hey guys, have you noticed anything weird?" The USSR quickly denied any such thing. They're like, "Nope, everything's fine." They were asked twice more in different ways, like through different people, but still evaded the question. Like, "Oh, no, we're fine." The next day, however, a carefully written statement had been broadcast across. Well, it's a written statement, but it was broadcast across Moscow, mentioning that there had been an accident at Chernobyl. This was like over the radio through approved sources, apparently. But they also said it was being taken care of, and that Westerners had definitely had more accidents than they had. So this was nothing. They made sure to add that in. It's like,
sure we have.
Okay, calm down.
Everything is always couched in the idea that we are better than everyone else.
Yeah, I'm like, what's the point of that? Just they also refused help, like when people did discuss. Anyway, so the day after that, which is we're now at Tuesday, April 29th, any news that reported the accident made sure to keep it short and somewhat hidden or overshadowed. As you can imagine, this sort of secrecy would backfire on them as news outside the country were definitely interested in the affair. But rumors and conjecture were reported and outside of the country, and panic pretty much set in, especially in parts of Europe where the cloud continued to spread because they didn't know what was going on. They weren't getting answers from the ones who had caused the accident.
Mm-hmm.
But this now included Poland, Germany, Czechoslovakia, and parts of France. Germany and Sweden were pissed, and rightfully so, because they just knew that the USSR was not telling the truth about things. But even within the country, May Day celebrations carried on, with civilians not knowing the air was likely radioactive by this time. Like, they made them have the parades. Like, they were made to go on as planned. Even if the government officials present knew what was at stake, they were just like, well, orders are orders. And we don't want to be shot. So foreign diplomats and reporters began outwardly protesting, and officials in the USSR had to know at this point they couldn't carry on with the silence too much longer. This was a way bigger incident than they had encountered before. And I say before because this is definitely not the first incident they've tried to cover up. Okay. Because,
I wasn't aware of that.
In November of 1975, a reactor at the Leningrad Nuclear Power Plant began running out of control after a scheduled maintenance, leading to a partial meltdown that sent out radiation into the atmosphere over the Gulf of Finland. In October of 1982, when Armenia was a part of the USSR, a generator exploded in one of the reactors in the nuclear plant there, and a team had to be airlifted in to save the core from meltdown after the turbine area had burned down. Another incident happened at a different plant 3 years later, where a relief valve burst, sending out steam of up to 300 degrees centigrade. It's an old word. And killing 14 men.
That's awful.
All of this was kept secret, basically, at the time. Other incidents not involving nuclear power were also hidden, including the accidental shooting down of a Korean airplane in 1983, killing 269 passengers. Like, apparently, the pilots had sort of accidentally gone into
Russian airspace?
Yeah, but and they were trying to get out. Something had happened with the navigation system. And yeah, they shot them down thinking that they were American spy planes. That they were an American spy plane. And
what year was that? 83, you said?
Yeah. And it was a mess. Like, afterwards, they tried to say they didn't do it. But then they were like, well, we thought it was an American spy plane. And I'm like, okay. But yeah. There was a big falling out from that. No pun intended. So yeah, trust was not...
Big fallout. Wink, wink.
So trust was not an easy thing with them. I'm not saying we're always honest either. I'm just adding context here. Okay. Now back to Pripyat, or the evacuated citizens of Pripyat, who were now scattered among the surrounding regions. They had been told to pack for 3 days and to stay with these like strangers, these other people living in these other villages. Those with family who had been working at the plant had little to no info on their loved ones. And when anyone asked about the situation, they were simply told to have patience. They had been there longer than 3 days. By now they were running out of food. Many of them were wearing clothes that had been contaminated, and the people they were staying with were running out of patience themselves. Because there's a lot of people just being put into other people's homes and stuff. Now, it wouldn't be long that the evacuation zone was extended further out to Belarus and uprooting over 100,000 more people.
Wow.
There was no plan, no testing done on those evacuated, and more than 1,800 of these people, including 445 children, would end up hospitalized, likely due to the radiation in the air.
How did the statistics even get published?
Probably heavy reporting after interviews, things like that, because even when it came to the official death toll, they don't include everybody. And we'll talk about that in a minute.
Amazing.
At this point, the dropping of sand, clay, lead stuff had ceased, as it only seemed to be helping temporarily, if at all. The temperature had begun to rise again, as well as radiation levels, and there was worry now over another possible critical event, and then something also known as the China syndrome. And I'm going to tell you what that means in a minute.
Okay.
This was actually, the China syndrome was actually something theorized by American engineers. Then, of course, it was used in Hollywood. Think of old doomsday movies. But in this scenario, it was suggested that the leftovers of a reactor that had melted down could get hot enough to melt down through the concrete foundation underneath into the basement and straight into the earth beneath it. Okay. Now, Hollywood, of course, had emphasized this effect to say that it could burn all the way through the earth to the other side, like in China. How you could dig a hole to China.
Is that why it's named China?
I know. It's kind of weird, the China syndrome. This obviously goes against any laws of science, but the real scenario of the core entering the earth could definitely affect the surrounding environment, including the nearby Pripyat River and other water sources, that people relied on. Before that, however, it could reach another water source within the plant. This could lead to another explosion of steam, as it's, there's still a closed system going on underneath it, destroying the other reactors and sending even more radioactive materials out into the atmosphere. This could lead to a lot of Europe being uninhabitable for a good 100 years. And this was their newest fear. Okay. Because they were okay, all that water that had flooded the basement too, because they were trying to put water and stuff, that was all radioactive water. And if it reached that water, it could react and cause another steam-like explosion. I know. So it was finally suggested and decided that nitrogen should be piped in underneath the reactor to cool it off by starving any fires of oxygen. They were going to freeze the ground and try to stop it from going deeper. They also had to decide where to even put the radioactive water they were going to pump out. They were going to pump out this all that radioactive water that had flooded in the pools underneath the reactor. Now, at this point, radiation levels just next to the unit were 2,800 REMs per hour. So even just getting close to it
was dangerous.
Was very dangerous. Wow. Now, elsewhere, Ronald Reagan, who was the U.S. president at this time, was actually in Japan on some tour or other when he was told about the incident and shown photos from a spy satellite. Now, he did offer assistance, but was told absolutely not. Handle it ourselves. Now, obviously, relations between America and the USSR were very much strained at this point.
If there was anybody,
and now too. There's always been some.
Yeah, oh yeah. If there was anybody who was in a pissing contest with Russia, it was Ron Reagan.
Oh my God. Yeah. Now, ironically, it rained in Japan while he was there, and the rain was radioactive. It had already spread this far now.
Love it.
Now, eventually, the International Atomic Energy Agency would get involved. This is as I said, international agency that's hey, we need to talk to you guys.
Are there multiple? I'm assuming there's multiple nations involved.
Yes.
Yeah.
So news began seeping into parts of the USSR through radio sources that would definitely not be okayed by the government. And this resulted in more rumors and panic in some places, mainly Kyiv. So it's information is leaking inside now. Yeah. Banks started running out of money because people were going and just trying to get all their money out. Yeah.
Oh,
there's panic going on now.
It was like that run on the bank we had a year or two ago.
But this could have been avoided if the government had been a little just honest and been like, hey, we're dealing with this, but please don't panic. Because like now you can't trust if any information they're giving you is correct. I don't know. It's just not a good thing.
The through line, one of the through lines of this entire situation is the approach or the philosophy of the Russian government and how they handle their, it's a lesson in what a communist government could become in a negative way. And it's also just an utter disregard for human life. Like they just don't care if people die. It's very much authoritarian.
Yeah, there's a lot of controlling of information and of people because a lot of these people actually had something called internal passports. So like if you live in the region, you can't leave the region unless you have like good reason, and you have to like send out for that good reason and stuff. And that's what was happening too. People were trying to leave and couldn't, or they would try to bribe
so awful
ways out and things like that because they just wanted to leave. Now back at Chernobyl, men were drilling into the foundation under the unit to pipe in nitrogen to hopefully freeze the ground and stop the sinking core. But there were many complications with this as well, as you can imagine. They were also sending in men to start pumping out radioactive water as planned, the whole time exposing them to unreadable levels of radiation. I mean, it was a very dangerous situation.
Would there have been any way, with the technology at that moment, would there have been any way to safely do any of this? I'm wondering.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about cleanup in just a little bit, but they were also trying to keep it secret, so they weren't going to bring in a whole lot of other help, right?
Come do this secret thing, which does not exist.
So this at least worked to prevent a second worse explosion. But after this, it was recommended that a chamber be built under the reactor, a really big chamber, to house this like water-cooled heat exchanger to prevent any escape of the core, because the core is so hot it can actually burn through the foundations of the...
To be built.
Yeah, underneath. It's very dangerous job, mind you.
Of course it is. I just can't fathom. All right, now we're going to build something. I just can't...
Well, they did build it, and they never needed it.
And everyone who built it died.
I know. But there were also special cleanup crews that did come, and these were actually using these tanks that were lined with lead, and they were designed to move and lift heavy debris. So they did at least have these, but this was like later on, like when they were actually doing cleanup, not during the accident itself. By the end of June, I remember this happened near the end of April. By the end of June, temperatures of the core finally declined, and fear of it burning through the ground were finally gone. And they did say it would take about 2 months for it to burn out on its own, so that sounds about right.
Okay.
The radioactive cloud that had come from the reactor had covered not only Pripyat, but also a lot of other villages, farms, agricultural land, and forests. It contaminated everything, ruining any food supply.
Yeah.
So within a month of the disaster, more than 5,000 square meters of land was dangerously contaminated. And while cleanup was ordered, you can't just clean radiation away like that. Like you can't it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
So all you can really do is relocate it or contain it somehow. And at this point, they're dealing with cesium-134, cesium-137, strontium-89, strontium-90, neptunium, and plutonium, neptunium-239, and plutonium-239. So it's like, as it decays, it becomes other dangerous stuff. Lovely.
Just real quick, this just popped in my head. I just remembered I had a patient several years ago who was working at a nuclear power plant. They store some waste on site, and eventually it gets hauled off to that Yucca Mountain or whatever in the Rockies. But like, they actually discovered an organism inside the storage tanks for radioactive waste that was eating the what is it called, the uranium, the depleted uranium, and it's just eating it.
Well,
and existing in the tank. Yeah, and I was like, "Are you joking?"
There's organisms that have adapted to do that. They've also adapted to eat plastics. So it's actually
we've
actually
talked
pretty
about
cool.
that before. Okay. Anyways, as you were,
we could totally do a Patreon episode on that.
Let us know.
Crazy radiation eating critters.
They eat radios.
Well, there's also like critters that live in like places that nothing else can live in too. Like the steam vents at like the bottom of the ocean. Like it's just not, it's uninhabitable. So aliens and water bears. Don't forget the water bears.
Water bears.
Yeah, tardigrades.
Okay, back to the regularly scheduled programming. Sorry about that.
While the Soviet government continued to say things were fine and under control, people were still being hospitalized due to the radiation. Even as of May 10th, so this is, a while after, nearly 9,500 people had been hospitalized, with at least 4,000 of those being in the previous few days. So like this is, later after the accident. More than half the number were children.
Oh, Lord.
And soon after this, 363,000 children and tens of thousands of nursing and expectant mothers were actually temporarily evacuated from Kyiv. If you can imagine the logistics of that kind of situation. They would eventually be allowed to return there, but still, that's crazy. Now, efforts to clean Pripyat would eventually turn into a very long project, as well as just the building of something called, they termed the sarcophagus. This was what they were building to contain Unit 4 and prevent further radiation from spilling out. So, like, basically, they just built this structure made of steel and concrete over the entire unit, and they labeled it the sarcophagus.
Oh, over it.
Yeah.
Okay, I
all
feel like,
over it.
Yeah. I feel like you said they were building it under the reactor.
No, that was something else they were building. They did build that too, but they never needed that.
Okay, so the eventual, they did build this though, like a complete an encasing structure. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it like lined with lead and something?
Well, it was built out of steel and concrete, basically encasing the unit. And if you have a thick enough bit of that, it should hold. Although they, but they would have to. It would only last about 10 or 20 years before they'd have to replace it. But it's what they had. Okay.
Wow.
And this was started 24 days after the disaster, so on May 20th, and it was built, like I said, out of steel and concrete. It was encasing the unit and its remaining 200 tons of lava-like corium, basically the core materials, the fuel materials, 30 tons of highly contaminated dust, and 16 tons of uranium and plutonium. So later in 2016, they did cover it further with something called the new safe confinement. So that's actually pretty recent to fully contain any radiation escaping.
That was further construction?
Yeah. And by 1996, though, radiation levels were still at like 10,000 REMs per hour. So it's pretty radioactive still in some places. Wow. And it's also spotty, like throughout the town. Like some areas are more radioactive than others. And so that's when you hear about the tours that they have, or that they did have before COVID and the whole invasion of Ukraine.
Yes, that.
I don't know that they can do that right now because of all that stuff going on. But before then, they had tours where like you could go and visit some of the places that were mapped out, like that had lower levels of radiation, and then you would be like checked out before you would leave. They would kind of scan you to see. Yeah.
Hard pass.
But they have a lot of like dark tourism kind of things where people love to go and do that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So.
Like the poison gardens in the UK.
Well, see, I would do that. I'm interested in that.
Of course you would.
But, and it's pretty cool to see. I just, I'm not a fan of radiation myself. So, but yeah. Now, cleanup also included basically mowing down contaminated forests, building of dams, and draining of certain areas of the Pripyat River to basically prevent further contamination downstream. It was a lot to do, a lot of work. And this was not so much to clean as it was to contain, if you think about it, because it's... And
that's interesting. If you have to dam up rivers, you're trying to stop the flow of water completely.
Yeah, and then they had they were adding filters to certain parts. I'm not even sure how you filter out these kind of particles. I'm sure there's a way to filter out like the alpha beta particles. I'm not sure about the other stuff.
Was this all funded by the Russian government, or was there any sort of international involvement?
No, this was the USSR.
Wow.
Because they were still not telling people too much about any of this.
Yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
so there was also something known as the elephant's foot, which was found later in the year, when cleanup was going on, or at least when they were surveying stuff. This was found below the remains of the reactor in a maintenance corridor. It's essentially this black corium, like fuel material that has formed of multiple layers that was created during the accident. And it's basically core material and fragments of the reactor that escaped through 2 meters of concrete. They just burned through.
Mercy.
It is 10% uranium by mass, which is, it's an alpha particle emitter. But also it contains fission products like cesium-137. So it also emits gamma rays, and it has a reputation for being one of the most radioactive objects in history. Its radioactive levels have decreased since its formation, but it's has a reputation for.
It would still turn Dr. Bruce Banner into the Hulk.
I don't know, or just
it's science.
Maybe kill him. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. No. It would make him the Hulk. Okay. It wouldn't kill him. Don't be ridiculous.
This isn't the only piece like this. This one's just known because of how big it is and the shape it is. It's known as the elephant's foot. But there are like a bunch of these different little things that have burned through.
Dude.
Now, no one would be allowed to return to Pripyat to live. Now, remember, they told them, like, yeah, just take like 3 days worth of stuff. You guys can come back. Some were allowed to visit to bring certain items back. They couldn't bring things like furniture or anything like that, though. Anything that would be heavy contaminated, they couldn't bring that stuff back. But they could bring things like photos, maybe little trinkets that would pass contamination zones. But after 4 months, those kind of visits ceased. They just stopped letting people do that, really. Everything left there was too contaminated anyway, including vehicles that were later moved and destroyed. They had left the whole, when the fire brigade got there, they left the fire trucks there and stuff because they were completely contaminated. There was no way they could. I mean, they eventually pushed them away and destroyed them eventually, but they just couldn't,
what a mess,
do anything like that. Now, a state decree gave a flat 4,000 rubles for single people and 7,000 rubles for families of 2 as compensation. Just for comparison, a new car would cost like 5,000 rubles. So honestly, this really isn't helping them regain what they had so much. I mean, they probably couldn't give them much more than that anyway. But like,
I mean, what do you do? This dude talking about 100,000 people, basically.
Yeah, so it's a lot. Yeah, and there were some charities and donations allowed. Like they had like charity concerts. Like they allowed that, I guess. Like, okay, cool, I guess.
That's so great.
Now, the plant workers and firemen that had been transferred to Moscow, they did not end up well, unfortunately, as I'm sure you probably figured. Now, the majority of them suffered acute radiation syndrome, which tends to cruelly trick its victims. So at first you have initial symptoms like nausea, vomiting, burns, things that you saw them having while they were still at the plant. But then there's this latency period where you start to feel okay. And you're like, oh, wow, I'm starting to feel better. Within a few weeks, however, symptoms come back in full force with hair falling out, skin and tissue necrosis, your white cell counts completely drop, allowing infections to come into play. You can even have infections starting from your own gut. The bacteria in your own gut can start just rampant infections. Skin turning black, the whole body swelling up, ulcers, organ failure. It's rough. It's not a, I mean, it's a rough way to die. Now, 31 men and women died at the hospital in Moscow as a direct result of the explosion and fire of Unit 4. While this became the official death toll, it still did not include the pump operator that had been crushed. Remember, we talked about him. He either vaporized or was crushed under all that immediately.
Before the explosion?
Right when the explosion happened.
Right.
Now, his body has never been recovered. There was also a man who had died while still in Pripyat hospital. He just had too much contamination to even make it to the next hospital. And then there were also 29 operators, firemen, and security staff that died in other wards. There were 13 patients at Hospital 6 in Moscow who received bone marrow transplants to try to treat them. Like, they were trying everything they could to treat these people. But only one of them lived. That would be Yevchenko, who survived. We discussed him a little bit earlier.
He survived.
But
Wow.
Akimov and Toptanov both died from the radiation, unfortunately. All the deaths were very horrible. A lot of the firemen died as well. I think there was only like one fireman that survived, and he had like lasting complications. Also, this ticked me off something fierce. Akimov and Toptanov, their families would later be told that, we're not going to charge them for their crimes in relation to this simply because they died. As if they committed crimes.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit more about the whole criminal part. But now, that really ticked me off. That really ticked me off. Like, they were doing what they were ordered to do, and they were doing what they could. It just really ticked me off. Now, for those who had been displaced at Pripyat, new homes were needed to be built. Some homes were built in Kyiv, and there were apartments that were being built or funded, but some of them just halted completely. And there was a lot of tension from those who already lived in the area against those from Pripyat, because they felt like they were stealing opportunities from them, coming in and, we don't like this.
I just started listening to a podcast that's addressing the cost of housing in America. One of the factors is actually what is known as NIMBYism. And a NIMBY is someone who already lives in an area, and their perspective is not in my backyard.
Oh Lord.
And the weird mindset is everybody believes that as soon as their house has been built, or they buy their house, there should be no other houses built. It's just like a natural.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, this is also a different place and a different time too. And I feel like I can see, I have a hard time seeing the other position, but if I think about the way they lived, like, they had to, like, basically be on waiting lists for houses. And so these people coming in.
Okay. So it's apples and oranges, because this is a communist society.
Yeah, this is a different kind of society. So I can see why they're upset, but at the same time, I would have a hard time being upset knowing what they just went through too.
Sure, they're basically refugees within the country. But
a lot of these people right now, they just feel like survival of the fittest, I think. They're just trying to survive.
Yeah.
Right? So there was a lot of that going on. What did suck, though, was a lot of these people were pretty much shunned. Even a lot of the kids were bullied and shunned because the parents of the other kids didn't want them playing together. They were worried about, like, there was some fear of radiation, like, spreading from these new residents. Now, the hallways of these new apartments had been showing higher levels of radiation than other places. Part of me thinks, though, that maybe they still had contaminated items like clothing that they'd never gotten rid of.
Well, yeah, but they don't. Come on.
Yeah,
it's not. They don't. The USSR government does not seem to be extremely detail oriented.
No.
Like, what are you going to do?
There was a patient in Hospital 6 that was so he had radiation sickness so bad he actually became a source of contamination. They literally had to replace the floors outside of his room. Yeah, it was bad.
Bro.
Now, obviously, he didn't make it, but it was bad. It was terrible. Yeah. Now, Burkhanov, you remember him, the director, Dyatlov, and this changed to Fomin to famine. Fomin were arrested, tried, and sentenced to 10 years on charges of breaching safety regulations, resulting in the loss of life at an explosion-prone facility. This ticked me off, though, because I'm like... Did
they just make that up the day before?
Okay, and, like, also Burkhanov and Dyatlov were also charged with abuse of power, which I find freaking hilarious given the government situation here. But okay. But, like, what ticks me off, though, is, like, y'all have been saying this whole time that it's impossible. It can't explode. It's impossible. And now you're going to charge these men for... With
the crime of exploding. Understood.
And I get it. Like, Burkhanov really shouldn't have, like, been in as much denial as he was in. Like, he really should have done better with communicating and stuff. But, like, 10 years? Like, it's not like he meant to do this. I mean, he wasn't even there when the accident occurred. He just happened to go in, after the fact and try to figure out what was going on. So, like, I felt kind of, I felt kind of bad. Like, I don't think any of them were prepared for any of it. The
No.
government included.
No.
And so, like, it just seems unfair that these 3 men just get thrown in a USSR prison cell for 10 years of their life.
That's just hysterical. And fun fact, I have a friend who I went to high school with. This guy ended up becoming an operator, a nuclear reactor operator at the nuclear power plant that is not far from here. And I had conversations with him about that process. And let me tell you, it's thorough.
Yeah.
Like, this is the Department of Energy. This isn't like, it's a very involved safety is the highest priority. They just, I don't know.
Well,
Them passing the buck to these guys is just so awful.
Well, they were only allowed to work with what they had too.
Yes.
So, like, if they wanted to do something different, they could request it and it would be denied because they just didn't want to provide the funds for that. So how was it their fault? Like, you know what I mean?
And I keep coming back to the fact that we're talking about electrical engineers, not nuclear engineers. It's a different thing, man.
There were other people charged and sentenced to lesser time. I don't remember exactly what for. Those were the 3 that stuck out to me, though, and that was they got the most time. And like, then there was like Akimov and Toptanov. That really ticked me off. They're like, we're not going to charge them for their crimes because they're dead. And I'm like,
thanks. I hate
jerks. Like, they did their best. Those were my buds. Okay, I liked them. Now, yeah. The 3 other reactors at Chernobyl actually came back on to supply power for a while. Mainly from what I read, it was mainly a sort of a, look at us, we can still do this kind of thing. It wasn't even, like, they didn't even really need it, but they did it anyway.
What?
Yeah. But they ended up being shut down in 2000. Yeah, I know.
They're just...
and part of the reason why they were probably shut down was because at that point they had been modified as much as they could to meet current safety regulations, because they were the same kind of reactor. So
yeah, but
I know
they're right next door to the thing.
I know. The sarcophagus. Yeah. Anyway, now the 30-kilometer exclusion zone, like I said, is about 19 miles in radius. If you don't know kilometers,
I do not.
Is still uninhabitable, and contamination still extends further from that, actually. Wildlife is out there, but there have been a lot of health issues like tumors and like genetic issues seen with some of that wildlife.
If Miles Davis plays a concert in Russia, does he have to refer to himself as Kilometers Davis for the entirety of the show?
Are you serious right now? Oh my God. Okay. Just go by KM. So yeah, but even so, the wildlife and plants have actually made a huge comeback there.
Really?
Yeah, they really have. There's wolves. Have you ever seen have you ever heard of like the Chernobyl dogs? Because a lot of pets were left behind because they couldn't take them with them, because that's sad, I know, because they were contaminated. So they basically became a part of the wildlife living there. But yeah, there's all kinds of wildlife out there now. But there's actually, from what I read, I don't know how true this is, but I read that there are some older people living in that exclusion zone, like in their own little villages, and the government has given up trying to expel them. Now, this would be the Ukrainian government at this point, right? So
we've talked about this like 3 times now. People who are in a toxic ghost town, and they're like, nah,
they like
not
it.
Gonna leave.
You know what? They like it. Living on the edge. There's also been illegal looting, poaching, logging, and metal salvaging there. Illegal, obviously, because it's radioactive. What are you doing?
You're not going to live long enough to see the benefits.
I mean, they're just going to sell it to somebody else and let them deal with it. Now, yeah, like I said before, you could visit the exclusion zone on tours before like COVID and all this other stuff happened. But I don't know if that's going to happen again anytime soon.
Hang on. Due to the risk of contracting a virus, we can't let you tour the radioactive blow-up site. Do I have this right?
Yeah.
I think that's really funny.
Well, part of it was probably the travel process too.
Chernobyl tours, because somebody might get sick.
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, of course, now they're kind of at war right now too. So that's
yes. But the principle remains: why can't we do the tours? oh, there's a virus going around, could make people sick, could kill someone. Well, that would just be the worst, wouldn't it?
But you could also like apply to visit certain areas that tourists couldn't visit, like as a scientist or like if you're studying something, but it has to be approved and stuff.
Yeah, the government has to allow
So,
this. You have to sign some paperwork
Yeah.
that says
So that
you're
was
not
a
going
thing
to court
too.
over
I don't know
anything.
if that's still a thing. Like I said, I know they're still doing their whole like the war thing is still happening. But they did. Ukraine took back Chernobyl, like that area. So I don't even know if they're fighting there anymore. But still.
Wow.
Can you imagine being at war? Like, all right, boys, we're gonna go in this crazy contaminated site and we're gonna fight here. Okay, let's go. Let's do it.
Take that place we never want to
Your
go
bullets
from us.
have lead in it. It's fine. Anyway, but so yeah. Now experts, for long-term speak here, experts say that there is some evidence of an increased risk of leukemia and cataracts among workers who received higher doses when engaged in recovery efforts.
Yeah.
Long-term health monitoring of these workers is ongoing. As of 2005, however, about 15 children had died from thyroid cancers.
Oh, no.
And I did look up, let me see if I can find it now. I did look up some of the people that were...
Are you in your web browser?
Yeah.
How many windows do you have open?
Shut up. Honestly, not that bad. It's only 18.
That is pretty good.
Pretty good, right? Dyatlov, I found out
You
later...
really pronounced it kind of cool just now.
Dyatlov?
Dyatlov.
He actually died
You're
from...
a Russian spy. Oh, my God.
I am going to hurl you out that window.
Okay.
He actually died
You're
from...
really cute, though. Like
If you stop interrupting me!
Sorry. Sorry. Okay.
Dyatlov, he actually went on to die from bone marrow cancer.
You really yelled at me. Sorry.
So, it's a serious conversation. He died of bone marrow cancer, likely due to the level of radiation that he ended up with.
Okay.
That's what you get. You kept interrupting me. Jesus. Viktor Brukhanov, he ended up dying of Parkinson's. He had multiple strokes from Parkinson's. And I was trying to find out someone else. Hang on. What's his name? Yevchenko, the one that survived initially. He was the one that had the bone marrow transplant that actually survived.
Yeah.
He, I think he ended up dying of leukemia later. Yeah.
Oh.
So.
I'm assuming the transplant did prolong his life.
Yes,
though.
it did, but he lived. But later on, he would go on to die of leukemia. Now, real quick, I want to go along with some comparisons because I did mention that we would discuss a little bit about Fukushima and how it was different.
Sure.
In this particular disaster.
Yeah.
For one, the accident at Fukushima occurred after a series of tsunami waves struck the facility after a pretty big earthquake.
Yes, I remember this.
That disabled systems needed to cool the nuclear fuel. And as we know, the accident at Chernobyl stemmed from a flawed reactor design, human error. It had a lot of when they were doing the tests and everything. But Chernobyl also released about 10 times the radiation that was released after the Fukushima accident. Okay. Now, at Fukushima, there were no explosions within the cores at all. There was progressive heating, oxidation. Some meltdown of the cores occurred over a long period of time. And there was some radioactive products that were released gradually. But they also had like suppression pools with water that would help with scrubbing or cleaning the radioactive products. Which reduced the atmospheric release. Also, the government acted very quickly in providing potassium iodide tablets, halting the food supply from the area, and evacuating immediately.
Yeah.
So, like, no one died from that incident.
You're joking. That is impressive.
Yeah. Let me make sure I'm giving the right information. But when I read, nobody died. Let me see. Nobody died as a direct result of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. That's what
incredible.
It says.
Fukushima for the win, dude.
But there have been like more than 2,000 disaster-related deaths. Like,
right. From the event itself,
there
were no deaths, but the long-term health was...
Well, I don't know. I think they mean like tsunami-type stuff. Disaster.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
That was a wild occurrence, that tsunami. I mean...
Yeah, there was no casualties as a result of Fukushima's nuclear plant. Also, I wanted to also briefly discuss 3 Mile Island, the comparison there. You ever heard about 3 Mile Island?
I have.
Yeah.
They've been in the news because, did you hear about this?
Now, is it recent?
Yes.
Huh.
Microsoft purchased 3 Mile Island.
Oh, I can imagine the conspiracy theories coming out of that. All right. Well, 3 Mile Island's reactor had a concrete containment structure that successfully prevented the release of almost all radioactive material when it, failed.
Bro.
The Chernobyl reactor had no containment structure because it was too expensive to add. So, it had that little thing that got blown to bits off of it, but
right. It was too expensive to add the thing it needs.
Right. Now, the effects of the 1979 3 Mile Island nuclear accident are actually agreed to be very low by scientists. And the American Nuclear Society concluded that average local radiation exposure was equivalent to a chest X-ray. Maximum local exposure equivalent was to less than a year's background radiation. So it didn't really release much of anything.
Impressive. Yeah.
So you could talk about 3 Mile Island and stuff, but it still isn't. While it did sort of create a lot of panic because people are like, nuclear disaster, it
right.
did.
They don't
there
have
was,
they're not able to put it in context.
It's still not anything like when reactor 4 of Chernobyl went to boom.
That sounds like an absolute disaster.
But like I said before, they have, even in those areas now, better built nuclear facilities because, they really, there's no way you could afford to go through that again.
Yeah, I don't know. Just practical application. I still believe that obviously technology could make a leap forward and discover some other sustainable power sources. Like cold fission or cold fusion, whatever it is. But nuclear power at the moment is for me. Just I'm speaking for myself. Feels like the way forward as far as sustainable energy.
Yeah,
because now it can be so much more safely done. It's its imprint on the environment is very minimal.
I'm just curious about something while I'm sitting here, but yeah, there's because there's really no way to tell. I imagine if there are any long-term effects from the cloud going over so many different parts of Europe either. So.
Oh, I see.
Because
you wonder over distance, does it degrade or
because there was literally radiated rain falling down on some of these places. So yeah.
Nothing to see here, comrade. Everything is fine.
Now, obviously, in the most exposed areas, you're going to see things like leukemia, increase in thyroid cancers, those kinds of things, because they especially saw some in was it Belarus? But that's really close to where the site at Chernobyl was. So, yeah. But it's interesting to me though when you hear about these kinds of disasters and it spews forth all this radioactive stuff, and it's like, oh, I wonder why we have so many cancers these days.
So how?
Thanks.
Yeah, right.
I'm not saying that's what's causing everything. I'm just saying it's
Yeah. How?
It wouldn't surprise me.
What are the metrics, the stats on how many superheroes were created because of Chernobyl?
Oh, I think that was just because of the whole nuclear age. Because it wasn't just Chernobyl.
So 4, 5?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have those facts. I can look it up for you later, though.
Please do.
But yeah,
because they should be in the Avengers, I think.
But I would like to make a disclaimer that radiation will not turn you into a superhero. It will melt your intestines and you will die.
Well, now you're just being ridiculous. Everybody knows that exposure to
amongst
just the
other
right
things
amount of radiation at just the right angle.
Your
Spider bite,
skin
perhaps.
will literally melt off of your bones. Your organs will turn to soup and you will die.
That's fake news. You'll actually be able to shoot spider webs out of your wrists, and your fingers and feet will.
Okay. And where are these spider webs made from? Where in your body does it come from?
They're made from the wrist vesicles.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Is it where your blue arrow used to be?
Yes.
Because now it's completely crap.
Yes. Dr. Stan Lee actually published a lot about this thing.
Did he know?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Believe me, it's true.
Well, yeah. So that's all I have for you. But
okay. Awesome. All right. ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for listening. That's going to wrap it for this episode. We will see you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.